Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another interview on the Bloody Elbow YouTube channel. Today, I've got the absolute pleasure of being joined by the one, the only, Jon Anik. John, how you doing today, mate?
Good to be with you, brother. How are you doing?
All good, thank you, mate, very much for asking. So before we sort of touch on the fights this past weekend at UFC 313, John, I just want to speak to you about a big milestone in your career. Recently launching the Jon Anik app. Could you talk to us a little
Huh.
bit about how that came about, why you decided to create that, and what the fans can sort of expect if they go and download the app?
Well, thanks. We'll see what comes of it. I mean, I think ultimately it's the hope that we'll create sort of a community and be able to connect in a way that maybe you can't on other social media platforms, just a more intimate setting. And there's content over there that's exclusively to the app. Behind the scenes stuff during these pay-per-view weeks, pay-per-view opens, things that I'm doing in my hotel room, or not doing in my hotel room at times. So a lot of different things planned. My fighter cards I think are going to be repurposed there. The fight use fighter cards. I mean, the dream, and you might have heard me say this, is to launch this Jon Anik broadcasting school, but it's a pretty big undertaking, and right now my schedule doesn't allow for me to give that the attention it deserves. But it's off the ground. It's free to download at the App Store, and we're pushing out behind the scenes content really every week. So I appreciate the people who have already downloaded, and we'll see what comes of it.
Of course. And obviously now we're a few days removed from UFC 313 from the T-Mobile Arena. Alex Pereira dethroned by Magomed Ankalaev. Um, as things were sort of unfolding in that main event, was there anything you were sort of surprised about? Because I know for myself, I was surprised that Pereira seemed quite passive. I know the stats have come out since, and he only threw 11 head strikes in the whole fight, which watching a per time fight, that's very surprising. Was there anything that you sort of looked at and were surprised about in that main event?
So sometimes it's easier to look at it retrospectively, right? So now after the fact, even when I think about the way Poatan was walking out, he didn't necessarily have that look in his eye. He almost didn't even seem as in sync with the music as he had been on normal walkouts. So who knows, right? I mean, a lot of athletes since this fight have suggested that maybe he bit off more than he can chew in terms of the back to back to back championship training camps. I don't know that we will ever know or be able to quantify, how much just the damage at the end of round two at the expense of Magomed Ankalaev, that was doled out by Magomed Ankalaev had to do with his performance over the final 15 minutes, even though he should have won round five on all three judges' scorecards. And he won round one. Round three obviously was close. I mean, it was a close fight. I think a rematch is very competitive. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like if I said this on the Anakin Florian podcast, and if Leon Edwards got real hurt by Bilal Muhammad in round one, he's not going to begin his post-fight press conference by saying, yeah, credit to Bilal, his striking was outstanding, right? It just isn't the way it works, right? So if Alex Poatan was really on the brink of being concussed or even finished at the end of round two, if there were 20 more seconds, he's not going to admit that to the masses. So only he knows exactly why maybe he wasn't as good on this night as others, but I think Ankalaev really deserves the lion's share of the credit.
No, of course. And I know before the matter you spoke to Mark Heck of MMAfighting.com, and I heard you say that you wouldn't be surprised to see Alex Pereira move back down to middleweight to take on Dricus du Plessis. I know it's a fight he's spoken about. Dricus has also spoken about that. Do you think that that's even more of a possibility now, even though they're talking about a potential rematch? Do you think that's kind of in the back of his mind now, even more so the fact that he's been dethroned at heavyweight?
I actually think it's less so
Okay.
because the calendar might have aligned for the Dricus du Plessis fight. It might not have. I mean, Khamzat Chimaev is going to be next, and maybe that fight is going to be in the middle of the summer, right? But I just think for Alex Pereira, had he been the light heavyweight champion and Tom Aspinall and John Jones sign, he still had an appetite for that fight because of what Dricus has accomplished at middleweight. And I think because of how it ended for Poatan in the middleweight division, which was on the wrong side of a knockout loss at the hands of the last style bender. So I do feel like he felt internally like there was some unfinished business. I think this loss actually maybe closes the door on that, at least right now. Not only is it a difficult weight cut, and not only does it make the media grind much more difficult leading up to the fight, But at this point, I just think a rematch makes all the sense in the world. And part of the reason for fighting Dricus as well was that maybe there wasn't going to be an obvious light heavyweight contender. If he goes out and knocks out Magomed Ankalaev, does he fight Carlos Ulberg or Jan Blachowicz again or Bogdan Guskov, or does he fight the winner of Dricus du Plessis and Khamzat Chimaev? So he's still the man. He's still going to be big fight chasing, but I think the immediate rematch is the thing that we all need to see right now.
And talking about that from sort of a stylistic point of view, 'cause I was very surprised that I know a lot of fans kind of get stuck behind the notion that Magomed Ankalaev is a grappler, but me and you both know, the experts out there know that Magomed Ankalaev is a striker. His bread and butter is his striking. Of course, he is very well versed in the grappling, but I was surprised to see him win this fight without landing a single takedown. What sort of adjustments do you think that Ankalaev, I mean, Pereira should make in the rematch if that does happen?
It's fascinating because I host the press conference sometimes and I look to my right and I look at the size of Poaton's left hand and I think, man, how does this man ever lose a fight in which he lands that left hook at all? So, yes, I mean, it's simplistic to suggest that he just needs to be more aggressive and offer up more reckless abandon in a lot of these situations, but he was backing up a lot. So I do think that he has to stand his ground a little bit more. And, Magomed Ankalaev is not some prolific finisher, at least in the UFC necessarily. And part of that is rooted in risk management and risk mitigation on his end as well. So I think at the highest level, sometimes you do get a fight that isn't an absolute bloodbath, and an absolute war. So I don't know that the second fight is going to look all that different. I think that Pereira just does need to stand his ground a little bit more. And I think, to your point, just be a little bit more of a headhunter. And, he did abandon the leg kick a little bit, but I think, again, Ankalaev deserves credit. The threat of the takedown was there. I think Ankalaev can make improvements as well. Anyone looking for plus money on Alex Pereira as an underdog, you're going to get it in the rematch. So, it's a fascinating rematch. I think it was a pick'em fight the first time around. It's a pick'em fight for me again. And, I think the promotion is wise to go in that direction. They just got to try to get it done by October, Abu Dhabi at the latest.
For sure. And we also had a blockbuster co-main event as well, Justin Gaethje versus Rafael Fiziev. That's a fight that I would watch 7 days a week, twice on a Sunday. I know some fans were a bit less excited about that fight than the Dan Hooker fight. But how impressed were you with Gaethje's ability to bounce back from such a devastating loss last time out and to show that he is still a contender in this division?
It's crazy. Justin Gaethje has had so many signature wins, so many amazing fights. To think that he could up the ante or produce one of his best wins at this stage of his career. Not that any of us put it past him, but my goodness, man, as a plus 130 or so underdog to perform like that and to, showcase all of his weapons and his toughness and his heart, and beating a guy twice on the level of Rafael Fiziev is not easy. He's a hard guy to beat once, and Justin was acutely aware of that going into the first fight 2 years ago. All hail Justin Gaethje, man. He absolutely should fight Islam Makhachev for the title. I don't know that he could have done more with this showcase, and sometimes decision wins can be better than finishes. And I think in this instance, right, had there been a quick knockout, right, and Gaethje had said, hey, if I have a quick knockout, I'll fight Islam Makhachev, and I actually think this is more useful. Justin Gaethje is going to go into the Hall of Fame twice. I don't know which fight they're going to pick of his to put into the Hall of Fame, but they're going to put a fight of his in the Hall of Fame, and he's going to go into the Hall of Fame. And my goodness, it was great to be able to see him for 30 seconds and congratulate him and his family because, he says, and I think I trotted this out there on the broadcast, maybe not, that every single fight is a traumatic life experience, and you can be sure it is. And he didn't minimize the trauma either. I'm sure his ribs were pretty sore the next day, but what a huge win for Gaethje and a career full of them.
Yeah, a massive bounce back win. And I want you to sort of play matchmaker a little bit for me, John. The lightweight division is, we're sort of seeing a bit of a transitional period in that division. We're seeing a few new contenders at the bottom of the division. You've still got the likes of Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler towards the top, Charles Oliveira, Arman Tsarukyan. You've
Yeah.
also got the addition of Ilia Topuria now. How do you match all of those guys up? Do you think Gaethje did enough to cement that title shot next time?
So it's a good question and it's a good problem to have. I truly don't know. It would seem to me, in a speculative way, I would say that Ilia Topuria has the inside track to fight Islam Makhachev. And I don't know if it's a case of sort of you got to strike while the iron's hot, or if there isn't an obvious number one contender because Arman Tsarukyan was unable to make the walk. I wonder if Islam Makhachev is going to have any say in all of this. And I wonder if his history, having defended the title twice against a featherweight in Alexander Volkanovski, plays into this at all. Because don't you believe, right, that if Islam Makhachev is probed about this, that he's going to want to fight Justin Gaethje? I don't know what the pay-per-view window says about Gaethje versus Topuria. What's the bigger fight? Charles Oliveira is worthy as well. I think we can all agree there are three options: Ilia Topuria, Justin Gaethje, Charles Oliveira. And the nature of this win for Gaethje and the fact that we haven't seen that fight, to me promotionally, I would go in that direction. But I say that with all due respect to Charles, of course, and to Ilia, right? Ilia Topuria didn't move up with a guaranteed title fight, but it would seem to me like he's going to get it. And actually, if you're Gaethje, you could do worse than having Islam and Ilia fight and then just sort of wait a little bit, and maybe that's a course of action for him.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I know Islam has spoke previously about wanting to fight Gaethje, being a true lightweight. Like you've said, he's got two title defenses against Volkanovski, which I think the fans hold against him a little bit, which obviously is quite unfair. But we've got another blockbuster event coming up in just over a month's time now, UFC 314. Talk to me a little bit about that card on paper and how that stacks up to be one of the best events this year, and we're only in April.
Do you have any insight as to why Miami gets these disgustingly good cards every year? Right now, all the pay-per-views are great, right? And granted, I work for the company, but my gosh, man, these Miami cards are absurd in terms of the depth, the preliminary bouts. So Diego Lopez, it's an incredible story, right? And I almost feel like I have to say Movsar Evloev's name 5 seconds later, and we can get to Movsar later, because if you're Movsar sitting there fucking 9-0 in the UFC, granted, maybe it's 9 decision wins, but you're like, wait a second, I beat that guy. And, in any other sport, I think really that would be a straight meritocracy. Movsar Evloev would be fighting for the title. But Diego Lopez deserves this, and his win over Brian Ortega, you can argue, is bigger than any win that Movsar has with respect to the former champion, Aljamain Sterling, right? The nature of it, the way Diego Lopez is putting people away, the way he's stepping up, weighed in as a backup, a lot of different things make him beyond worthy of a championship opportunity as well. What does he do with it is the question. I think, not unlike what we saw from Gaethje, it stands to reason that you're going to get a throwback type performance from Alexander Volkanovski. So, fascinating fight. I haven't seen a betting line as yet. I would imagine Volkanovski is a slight favorite, and I do believe it stands to reason the time off for Volk could be something that really buoys him in this fight. Does Diego Lopez have 10 or 15 good minutes in him? I think he might have 25, but I think the nature of his brain and his mindset is such that he's just going to go for it. He's going to go for the finish early and often. And I think instinctually, if he's really fighting on instinct and taking what the fight gives him, he's not always going to be the fresher fighter in minute 23, and that just comes with the territory. So I can't wait to see that fight. If Diego Lopez seizes the moment, right, it's in a sense not unlike Alex Pereira's, right? I mean, the championship won't have happened as quickly, but, this guy was not a UFC fighter a couple years ago, and absolutely incredible. And that, says nothing of all the depth below that fight at 314.
Of course. And I know I've seen a lot of people on social media sort of looking at Volkanovski and thinking that maybe his time at the top is coming towards an end because of his last few losses. But I think when you take into consideration the opponents that he's faced, like Makhachev, Topuria, it's hard to sort of say that he is past his best. What are your thoughts on that?
He's in outstanding shape, right? I mean, you don't take your shirt off at a pre-fight press conference like that if you don't want to show the world that you are ready to go, several weeks out. So Volk's ready to go. He really is. And I think he's just trying to maximize this phase of his career. But I think a guy like that, his confidence is so unshakable that even off a concussion filled loss, right? I still feel like he feels like a couple weeks later he can beat a man if he needs to. So I don't know that you're ever going to sort of get him mentally off of his game. I just think it's a question of the physical. And, sometimes it's not necessarily a case of what you're doing. It's a case of just the opponent being younger, fresher, more primed, more primal, right? But in terms of the hunger, right? Championship hunger. I think oftentimes it should be a key lens when you're sort of handicapping these fights. And Diego Lopez leads the league in championship hunger, right? So where is Volk as far as that trajectory right now at this stage of his career? And I would submit to you that it's still right there, you know? And I guess there are some fighters who maybe find themselves in a massive, massive spot and they don't have that championship aspiration. And, like Aaron Blanchfield is always the fighter that I bring up. And I think Manon Fior is a good fighter to bring up. Like Blanchfield, yeah, she'll cash the paycheck, but like she's obsessed with being a UFC champion. And I think that's hugely important. I think Lopez has that. I think Volk has that. Will his body cooperate? We'll find out on 12 April.
Yeah, and that's another co-main event as well, similar to this past weekend. That is just it's such a tantalising matchup. You've got Paddy the Baddy Pimblett taking on Michael Chandler. Fans are sort of looking at this as one that has been put together pretty. I don't know the word, but that the UFC have sort of put this together, looking at Paddy's future potentially. I know he's talked about potential matchups against Conor McGregor in the future, which is obviously something that would be huge for UK MMA.
Yeah.
What do you make of the matchmaking for that co-main event?
So I've been on the Paddy Pimblett train for a long time, right? Sort of defending him and his grappling when people were just thinking he was a one-trick pony. He really can do it all. And, you probably heard me say repeatedly, he could have gotten to the UFC at 21. He could have gotten here at 23. Not unlike Israel Adesanya, he did this the right way. So I'm excited to see what he can do. Certainly I felt like he had the chops to be top five. I never answered the question as to whether or not I thought he could be a world champion, but people aren't doubting him anymore. His contemporaries aren't doubting him anymore. And now he's got an opportunity against a guy who, yes, has struggled in terms of the win-loss record in the UFC and Michael Chandler. But, I mean, my gosh, right? The guy is world class. And I think even Charles Oliveira and his contemporaries who, have suggested that maybe he doesn't always play by the rules or they take issue with him being fake, I think they would at least acknowledge his commitment, how good he is skill for skill. And I also believe, too, in terms of that championship hunger, that Chandler still has it. Paddy Pimblett has it for sure. And my gosh, what a star. What a star. Like seeing the fans respond to Poatan and Marab and all these guys is really cool. And then, of course, Paddy Pimblett gets the loudest ovation by a pretty good measure last Saturday night. So, yeah, I can't wait to see what he does with the showcase. And one thing, too, is he's like not intimidated at all. He's not batting an eye. He's ready to fight the guys. He's calling out fucking Charles Oliveira. Like, what else do you need in terms of the guy's self belief? So, yes, I am bullish on Paddy the Baddy Pimblett.
Yeah, there's not many walkouts like a Paddy the Baddy Pimblett walkout, especially in the O2 in London as well. Two more fighters that we have on that card as well, though. Two of the most exciting fighters coming through the fighting nerds. That team just the breeding ground for incredibly exciting talent. We had one this past weekend in Mauricio Rufy scoring potentially the knockout of the year. And then at 314, we have Carlos Prates and John Silver. When you look at that team, John, I'm going to slightly put you on the spot here. Who do you think has the highest ceiling out of those guys? You've got the likes of Caio Borralho, you've got Carlos Prates, you've got Mauricio Rufy, John Silver. Who do you think out of that team has the potential to go to the very, very top?
That is an outstanding question. I wish we had asked it on the Anik and Florian podcast. I think what's most amazing about that question, as I try to stall and sidestep it, is that they all really could ascend to the top. I mean, some have difficult divisions to navigate. Kyle Bohalio is the guy who I think is closest to the championship right now. Far be it from me to doubt Mauricio Rufy. I really would like to see him get that prominent big fight and maybe an event, right? Like John Silva, I think, is the guy who my broadcast partners and my podcast partner would answer. They would say John Silva. Ah, I will say Mauricio Rufy.
Okay,
I
it's an
think that
interesting pick.
well, I just think that so Pablo Sucupira, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, is the head coach of the Fighting Nerds. And you have a lot of these coaches like Mornay Visser, and they're able to extract incredible things out of their athletes, right? But if you're just peeling back the athlete, right, in terms of just the God-given gifts and whether or not they can harness it is another question. Mauricio Rufy is a sight to behold, bro. I mean, I don't recall reacting to a knockout ever like that, holding an O as long as I did this weekend. So it's a tough question. Uh, Yeah, I guess I'll just say based upon sheer athletic ability, Rufi. Carlos Prates, I just think how many welterweights is he going to have to beat to get to Bilal Muhammad right now? You know what I mean? And he's got Jeff Neal in front of him. So that's the only reason why I didn't immediately go to Prates, right? What an exciting time for that team. And I don't know how much credit the coach deserves, but my goodness, 18-0 in the UFC for those four. It's insane.
Yeah, it's absolutely mental. And Mauricio Rufy could sort of be the beneficiary of, like we mentioned earlier, the lightweight division being in somewhat of a transitional period with the likes of Dustin Poirier. He's retiring in his next fight. You don't really know how long Gaethje's got towards the top of the division anymore, so he could sort of be one of those new guys at lightweight and spearhead this division and try and carry on the sort of the name that the lightweight division has made for itself in the past few years with those likes of Dustin Poirier and the fighters I've just mentioned. Ignacio Bahamondes as well. One
Yeah.
that's just performed in the lightweight division now with a ranking next to his name. How about that?
It's interesting because oftentimes we as commentators, not only are we charged with helping build stars and humanizing these athletes, but people will say to us, oh man, the cupboard's bare. Who's going to be the star? And Merab Dvalishvili is a massive star. I remember before Israel Adesanya, people were asking that question. Stars always emerge. And I do believe when it comes to what Ignacio Bahamondes could do for Latin America, Mauricio Rufy, the possibility of Khamzat Chimaev becoming a UFC champion, right? On it goes. And I'm certainly going to do my part to help build these stars, but oftentimes, and this isn't a cop out answer, these things take care of themselves. Justin Gaethje is one of one. I've never seen anything like him. I don't think we ever will. I actually can say I know we never will. And Poirier has methodically built his legend in an amazing way, dating to his Fightville documentary back in the day, right? But I think a lot of these other guys can do it. Can Nacho become as big of a star as Dustin Poirier? That's going to be an exceedingly hard thing to do. Conor and Khabib gave the rub to a lot of these guys that have used that to their benefit. But I just think these things have a way of working themselves out. And, whoever emerges at 55, that division's always going to be in pretty good hands. And hey, I mean, the Latin American thing would be enormous. If Nacho could do it, he would be a massive, massive star. If he could just get to the title fight, he'd be a massive star.
Yeah, and just a few more from me, John, if that's
Yeah,
okay. I
of
really
course.
appreciate your time as always. As part of Dana White's announcement of the UFC 314 card, we obviously had the announcement that Patricio Pitbull's finally signed for the UFC. A lot of fans sort of looking at that maybe that it's too late in his career and it's come at a point where he's sort of only a few fights away from retirement. What are your thoughts on that? And do you think he can make a big splash in that division?
Well, certainly he's going to be focused, and he seemed very focused. It was nice to meet him at the press conference and see him get a little bit of a shine a few days ago in Las Vegas. I'm hearing amazing things about Yair Rodriguez, and if you think about what that team is doing with Bilal Muhammad and Ignacio Bahamondes and Yair just being totally all in, I don't have to tell you about his physical gifts. I think the issue might just be that the opponent is completely effing locked in right now, but we'll see, man. Sometimes it doesn't always translate when you get to the UFC, but he's got a lot of big fight experience, a lot of finishing ability, and I do think the championship hunger is still there. Age is just a number. It would have been interesting to see him in a different stage of his career against some of these guys, but we'll see. As I sit here, I don't know what the betting line is. I don't know how wide those odds makers think it is, but Yair, I can tell you, is in fine fettle right now and figures to be a real problem come April 12th.
Yeah, and the last one from me before I let you go, John. Only in March we've already had some really, really great fights. What are three fights that you hope get made this year? Because I know the fans obviously are still clamoring for John Jones versus Tom Aspinall, potentially Islam Makhachev versus Ilia Topuria. If it was your choice, what three would you make this year?
So I do think the Merab Dvalishvili Alexandre Pantoja fight is interesting, but Pantoja wants to go down as this all-time great flyweight, and you do have Kai Kara France and Manel Kopp sort of both waiting in the wings. So I'm not sure that fight is going to happen. And as much as I have championed the cause of Manon, I will say Valentina Shevchenko versus Zhang Weili. I would really like to see that mega fight in 2025. John Jones versus Tom Aspinall. I mean, does that go without saying? You almost need to give me four choices if
Yeah,
I'm
I think that
including
one go.
John Jones
Yeah,
and Tom Aspinall,
that one goes
And
without saying.
Khamzat Chimaev Dricus Du Plessis was my dream fight going into the year. Now the foundation has been laid, so I think you're definitely going to get that fight. And then the last one I will say would be Robert Whitaker versus Sean Strickland. I think that's an important fight in the middleweight division. And, I think really for the loser of that fight, it will be so consequential in terms of ever competing for that title again, just given everything that's happening at 85. So I'd like to see Whitaker Strickland as well. Big year for the middleweight division. And yeah, I mean, if it were up to me, I go Du Plessis, Chimaev, headlines International Fight Week with Strickland Whitaker right underneath it.
I mean, I wouldn't say no to that, not at all. Thank you very much for your time today, John. I'll leave the last word with you. Let the fans know where they can download your app.
You can go to the App Store and download the Jon Anik app, and you can always get the Anik and Florian podcasts there, and also on the DraftKings YouTube channel as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your time today, John.
Thank you, brother. Good to see you.